Welcome to the show. I am your host, Bryan Lee Whatley. Our story begins tonight with our special guest, Theodore Shoebat, discussing his book he co-authored with his father, Walid Shoebat, and the book is titled For God or for Tyranny. Theodore or Ted Shoebat is the son of Walid Shoebat, a former PLO terrorist. At the age of 16, Ted released his first book, In Satan's Footsteps, which has been followed up with For God or for Tyranny. Ted grew up in the U.S. in Northern California, attending in the public school system, but because of his conservative and religious upbringing, he often struggled with his teachers and fellow students. He personally witnessed Holocaust denial, anti-Semitism, and anti-Zionism in the schools, and his defense of Israel and the Jewish people made him a victim of ridicule and mockery. Not only was he bombarded with criticism for his conservative and religious beliefs, they also attempted to squash his expression by labeling him with a psychological condition known as Asperger's syndrome. Though the educational community thought it was a stigma, Ted took it with pride, since it was said that Bill Gates and Albert Einstein were also diagnosed with Asperger's, which is a personality that includes such positive human behaviors as loyalty, honesty, and bluntness. Ted is the primary contributor for this amazing work of research. And it is this timely work, based on the current state of our nation and the pivot point in that direction that America might take. What is even more amazing is Ted Shoebat was about 18 years old when this book, his second book, went into publication. And I believe you'll find this work very thorough and thought-provoking. Our musical guest tonight is Karen Saglofjevich of JMR Productions, with the Maynard Triplets singing the song from the same titled CD. His name was Freedom. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Welcome, Ted. How are you doing?
Doing all right. Yourself?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. Like I just said, I'm really excited to have you on the show. Your books are pretty amazing. The stuff that you're putting out there. You come from a very exciting life. Can you tell a little bit about yourself more for our listeners?
Well, yes. When I was, my father, for one thing, was a former Muslim, and he was involved in terrorist groups in Chicago and in the Middle East in the 70s and in the 80s. And in 1993, he compared the Bible with the Quran and realized that the Quran is inferior to the Bible. The Bible is in fact the absolute truth. And he converted to Christianity. And ever since then, he has had a higher calling in teaching people how in the West Islam is in fact a major enemy to the West, to Western civilization, and not just that, but also in how in the Bible it prophesizes on the coming of Islam and on the Islamic empire, so to speak. About myself, I have always been, well, not always, but since I was in junior high, I've always been a very outspoken person about my Christian beliefs. And I always used to argue with my teachers in junior high and in both high school as well, arguing, for example, my teachers that believe that this country was founded on genocide, believe that this country was founded on racism. People who say that we as students should experiment with our sexuality, we should try homosexuality and heterosexuality and whatever. And I've always been an outspoken critic to my teachers about this, and the way I look at it is I always want to be right with God. So I do everything I can within my limits as an American citizen to do what I know best, and that is to show people the differences between what is evil and what is good, because many people don't know, and that was really what Insane Footsteps, my first book, was about. I began writing that when I was 15 years old, and it began as an interest that I had about Mormonism, and I began to research Mormonism and realize how much it has similarities with Islam, and how here in America we once had a problem of Mormon insurgency, in that Mormons were pillaging villages, they were beginning massacres. The most famous massacre was the Mountain Meadow Massacre in the mid-1800s, and over 200 Americans died. And as a matter of fact, it happened on September 11th, and that is one of the great epochs of the great climaxes of the Mormon tyranny, or the Mormon terrorism, actually, which began in this country, and how at one point in time we were dealing with very similar things. So it began with that, and I began doing research on Mormonism and Islam, and beginning to compare as well these two religions with other religions as well, such as the Mexican religion, the pre-Christian Mexican religion. You had the Native Indian religion, or even Satanism. You had the Satanists up there in San Francisco. You read the Satanic Bible,
right,
and you actually find similarities with it with the Quran, and also Aleister Crowley and the wizardry, and how within Islam it is filled with wizardry, and how when you look at a lot of in fact, all of the tyrannical ideologies, which have come across the world, many of them are based on naturistic paganism and wizardry and what they call necromancy. So I believe that Christianity really is the main faith, really, that brought civilization. It is the faith that really brought civilization into the Western world. Yeah. And that's what I like to talk about, really, is how that happened and why that happened.
See, I think that's pretty amazing that you're talking, and that's one of the reasons why I find it so fascinating, is because your massive studies and research on religions, and for most of my life I've studied different religions for different types of research reasons, and it's comparing those, and so you're doing the same exact things that I've done most of my life as well, and what it's interesting on your viewpoints against Mormons. That's probably one of the only few that I haven't really looked into. But in your thoughts on Christianity, because one of my overall thoughts is that most religions are considered, and I consider myself a Christian, but most people, well, sorry, I'll just say, I think that most religions are formed for a type of ideologic reasoning for society. If you look at the majority of them, they all have a basic fundamental system to them, and that is bringing amongst their groups, bringing peace to themselves and to whatever their beliefs are, and to bring a civilized order in society for their preachings. Now, it may not necessarily, I think we get into problems whenever one religion crosses over into another religion, or they get into their land, and even if we go back and look at Christianity in terms of the Christian wars that they sit across, we're fighting for this because of God, or we're doing something else because of Jesus, or like the Crusades, all kinds of other stuff. But I always thought that even if you look at the different aspects of religion, that the overall fundamental basics of it is some type of civilization, and that's what you had said as well in terms of Christianity. Do you kind of believe in that?
Well, many of the religions, in fact, I think all of them, anytime you have a religion that intermixes with the state, that state or that government believes that they are upholding civilization. Now, you brought up one point near the end, and I want to see if I understand this clearly, was that you brought up the Crusades. Just to clarify something on the Crusades, I think there's actually a lot of misconception on this. The Crusades, for one thing, originally, its original idea, and I understand that they were Crusades who did evil things, but that wasn't part of the mission. The mission of the Crusades really was to preserve the church in the Middle East. If you think about it, the Muslims actually tried to attack, before the Crusades, tried to invade France, which they failed, tried to invade the Vatican 7 times, failed every time. And they began to, they actually pillaged and took over the churches of St. Paul and St. Peter in, I believe, Constantinople. And they were pillaging throughout Christian Syria, throughout Christian Turkey, or we would call it Constantinople. And they were also attacking Christian pilgrims who were entering into Jerusalem to observe pilgrimage, because that is the Holy Land. And this was going on for about 500 years. So the Western Church didn't do anything for half a thousand years, almost 1,000 years, for 500 years, which is about half a millennium, I believe. And they didn't do anything until the Pope of the Eastern Church sent a letter to Pope Innocent in the I believe it was in the 1000s, maybe 1060 AD, I believe, somewhere around there. Maybe before that. But the European Church didn't do anything until the Eastern Church sent a letter to the Crusade, and that is when the first Crusade began in the 1000s. So the Crusade, in my opinion, was justified. If the Crusades didn't do anything, then the Middle Eastern Church, the Muslims, the Saracens, as they called them, would have conquered the entire Eastern Church. So the Crusades, in my opinion, was very true. But to cover the rest of the things that you said about civilization, yes, the Aztecs believed that they were upholding civilization, and the Romans believed that they were upholding civilization, and the Incans also believed the same thing. The Romans would have told you in the Republican Rome before the time of the Caesars that they were upholding what they called. Let me try if I can get the Latin correct. Libertad Populi Romani, I believe they called it, the liberty of the Roman people.
Wow. Okay.
And
That's impressive. I don't speak Latin. That was pretty cool.
Well, thank you. Well, I know a little bit, but they believed that it was the liberty of the Roman people, and they believed that their republican system was the highest form of civilization. Now, there were some things in the Roman Republic that were good. The people had the right to vote. They had the right to vote in their senators, to vote in their magistrates. They had a right to assembly, just like we have here in the United States. They did have these things. But here's the thing, that these rights were only granted to Roman citizens. Those who were not Roman were believed to be inferior to the Roman race, and therefore they were considered deserving slavery, which is why the Romans tried to create a universal empire and basically tried to create be the greatest kingdom on earth, which they were for a long time.
Oh, yeah,
and they wanted everybody to be enslaved under the Roman race. Now they did have beliefs that were righteous, the right to vote, right to assembly, and all that, but those were only granted to the Roman citizens. Now, they did not have freedom of religion. In fact, Tertullian tells us in his Apologetica that in order for a religion to be legalized, it had to be accepted by the Senate. Now, here in America, we have freedom of religion. And Romans were forced to follow the state religion. And if you look at a lot of the ancient writers, and probably the most notable one was Celsus, who was an ancient Roman intellect. I believe he was a Stoic intellect who was very well known at the time, around the 2nd century AD, around 2nd or 3rd, 2nd century AD, I would say. He believed that it was justified for the Roman Empire to massacre Christians because they were not following the state religion. So the Romans believed that they were having liberty and civilization, yet they, in our standards, in our American standards, they were very tyrannical. And you can talk about the Aztecs, and the Aztecs were much worse than the Romans because the Aztecs believed that everybody was a subject under the king. And the king was God, he was the sun god reincarnate, and everybody needed to follow him. If you didn't, you were an enemy to the state, and you deserved to be sacrificed to the sun god, Tonatiuh. Now, when the Spaniards conquered Spain, now the Spaniards did commit massacres nonetheless, but they did make human sacrifice illegal. They did make cannibalism illegal, because when the Spaniards came, according to Cortez himself, he saw the Aztecs put human beings in cages, stuff them up, feed them to get nice and fat, and they would cook them up and eat them up with chili pepper sauce. And when the Spaniards took over, and even Cortez himself said, he says, I will dedicate myself to stopping this great evil. And they were ruthless. Of course, they had to be ruthless. I mean, like, what did you want to? And I'm saying you personally, but many people who criticize the conquistadors, what do you want them to do? Go there and sing, kumbaya with the Indians? You had to be ruthless with these people. There was no choice. And the people, the Aztec Empire, committed, according to what I have read from archaeologists, around 25,000 human sacrifices every year. So, and they considered themselves to be they had a great city which they basically worshipped. It was called Tenochtitlan, I believe it was called. And it wasn't built by the Aztecs. It was actually built by the Toltecs, which was a past civilization before the Aztecs. And they took the city, and the pyramids were still there, and they basically made it their religious pilgrimage site, their holy land, so to speak. And they believed that the pyramids were the foundation of the heaven and the earth. And the city itself touched the heavens. And the city itself, they believed, was a mirror image of the city in heaven, the city of the gods. And they themselves believed that they were the greatest people on earth, but they weren't. They were very ruthless and very savage. And there was a very famous Spanish monk who came to Mexico as a missionary from Spain. His name was Diego de Landa. Landa came, and basically there was a famous story. He was walking down the forest one day, and he saw a group of Indians about to commit human sacrifice, and he immediately jumped in there, and he grabbed the girl about to be sacrificed and said, "Enough with this evil, enough with this idolatry," and preached the gospel there. No one can deny that this is a noble act. And when you look at, even in the New Testament, we find St. Paul preaching against the worship of Diana and the worship of Artemis. Now you say, well, what's wrong with worshiping Diana? Well, Christ himself said, "Pergamus, thou art the seed of Satan." And the reason why he said this was because Pergamus was the site of the greatest of all the, I would say probably the most numerous of the persecutions against the Christians. It was a tyranny.
Right.
And it was a tyranny that was based on the state. And part of the state religion was the worship of Diana. And the worship of Diana was actually built collectively, according to the historian Livius. We find that Diana was built collectively by the Ephesians. And they had the other people of Asia Minor, which we call modern-day Turkey, built this whole temple together and universally or collectively worshipped Diana. And this became the state religion. So for Paul himself to say, enough with the worship of Diana, enough with the worship of Artemis, took a lot of bravery, and not only was he going against, he wasn't going against the mere faith, he was going against the state ideology. It would really be no different than going into the Third Reich and saying enough with the worship of Hitler, enough with the Third Reich ideology, which was that Christ was a Aryan, he wasn't a Jew, and that Hitler himself was possessed with the Spirit of God, and that Hitler was the Messiah of the German people. Now, for you to go into the Third Reich and say something like that was death sentence. And Paul did his death. He was beheaded by the Emperor Nero for the things he was saying. So when people say that, well, every religion thinks that they're bringing civilization, that is true. But the question is, are they right? And that's the thing. That's one thing that I think we need to be careful about, and we need to seriously, study this analytically.
Now, your book, For God or Tyranny, because you brought up tyranny quite often, and that tyrannical, if that's a word, I just made a bushism.
Sure. Tyrannical is a word, by the way.
Is that good? I thought it was. I was going back to my high school days.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm pretty sure I read that. Anyway, your book, For God or Tyranny, what was one of the main reasons? Because you're hitting on a lot of stuff. I believe is very, very important. But what was one of your main reasons for writing the book? Well,
it's a very good question. In Satan's Footsteps was mostly about Mormonism and Islam, but I became very fascinated with what we're talking about right now, and I wanted to get into a much more deeper level, in the more detailed level, in that when people don't, not when individual people, but when you have whole nations or whole societies rejects Christianity, or they have no idea about what Christianity is. What's void is an absolute principle. And by absolute principle, I mean a morality which does not change. Now, what do I mean by that? When you look at, well, not to divert from the subject. Yeah, you're right. I should stick with the subject. But, that is what got me very fascinated. And another thing that, the main reason, to answer your question really, the main reason why I wrote For God or Tyranny was because I was quite frustrated with hearing not just people on the left, but people on the right as well. They were saying that Islam was, and I heard this on Sean Hannity, and I heard this on even on numerous other talk show hosts,
right.
That Islam is a conservative religion, and that it is a religion based on family values. And I became very frustrated with this, and I wanted to prove that wrong. And that is the main subject of the book, is proving that Islam is not a conservative religion, and that once you study it, it's actually more similar with leftist ideology. And I go through that time and time again in the book. Throughout the book is the main subject. And what I do is I say, well, if you look at some of the greatest of the leftist ideologues, let's look at the father of what we call of leftism in Europe, in the Western world, was Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau wrote a book called The Social Contract, and he believed that you don't really own anything, and that the government has the right to control your property. And he criticized, this is very interesting about Rousseau, and this is why I don't understand why you have people on the left saying that Christians want a theocracy, which is not true. Rousseau hated Christianity, and he makes it very clear in his book. He says that Christianity is the biggest obstacle to my utopia, biggest obstacle to my social contract. And he gives his reasons why. He says that Christ did not want his church to become one with the state, one with the government. He makes that very clear in his book. And he's right, by the way. Christ did not want the state and the church to become one. That's why Christ said, render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, render unto God what belongs to God.
Exactly.
So he did not want a church government which would control people and get involved in law and things of that nature. When you go into a country, you obey the laws.
Oh, yeah. Well,
yes.
I'm an Iraqi vet. I'm an Iraqi vet, and that was one of the things whenever we got prepped to go over there, even we had a mission to go over there, but we respected their religions and their beliefs and everything else to the utmost. I mean, they've got some very strong beliefs, and they go into prayer and all kinds of other stuff. I mean, we completely respect the people for what they believe in, and I have to admit, I mean, people have heart for what it is, for what they fight for. So, but yeah, I agree. You don't go into another place and disrespect your religion on some cases like that. And the separation of that between church and state, I think, is huge as well.
But it's a Christian tenet if you think about it, because if you look at the pre-Christian civilization, the Romans believed in mixing religion and state, which is why they worshipped the Caesar. And Egypt as well, you had to worship the Pharaoh by law. Pharaoh was God. They actually believed that the soul of the Pharaoh resided in the sun. And if you look at the Incans had a very similar belief. They believed that the Incan royal family descended from the sun itself, and that the sun deserved worship. And if you look at, even Julius Caesar, they say after Julius Caesar died, Augustus became the Caesar, because he was the adopted son.
Now, are you talking about sun as in the actual sun that we look at and we receive heat from, or are you just talking about stars in general? They come from the stars.
The sun, the heat, the solar star.
Okay.
Oh yeah, but Julius Caesar, after he died, Augustus became the emperor of Rome, and he actually commenced a festivity in Rome in which they would celebrate the deification of Caesar. And there was a shooting, according to Suetonius, the Roman historian, there was a shooting star who crossed the sky. The people said, "Oh, what is that?" And Augustus looks up and points his finger to the sky and says, "That is Julius Caesar watching over us." And it's comical when you read about it, but they took that stuff very seriously. And to defy against that could have been death, very close to death, or imprisonment. But when you look at the Roman idea of liberty, near the end of the reign of the Caesars, you had numerous philosophers. I believe Seneca was one of them. And they had this idea that everybody had liberty. Everybody on earth deserved liberty. And they tried to change the status quo in Rome, that only Romans deserve liberty. And these philosophers began to say, well, no, everybody deserves liberty. But the problem is that these philosophies did not really take a hold on the minds of the people throughout the Greco-Roman world until the coming of Christianity. And the reason why was because the Roman idea of liberty was that God did not give it to you, but the emperor did. The emperor was the one responsible for your happiness. And so when you change the belief that no, the emperor does not give you your liberty, God is the one who gave you liberty, what that does is it makes liberty unchanging. And when things are impossible to change, you can't get rid of it, you can't alter it in any way, then it becomes something concrete. Then now you have a foundation to stand upon, because now God is on your side. And that is really, I believe, the main tenet in the American idea. That's in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Unalienable means that they cannot be taken away or they cannot be given away. And these rights are the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, we have people in this country who want to take away these rights. And we see that in the abortion idea. And I know the abortion is taboo to a lot of people, but it's the truth. We have taken the right of life from the unborn. And it is absolutely contradictory to the ideas of America. And it's a very big insult to the American idea. And the reason why these edicts, I don't call them laws because I believe that they are lawlessness, but the reason why that the government has permitted women to kill their own child was because in the 1960s and even before that, this idea came out called positivism, which was this belief that things are always changing. And a lot of it had to do with evolution, Darwinism, because Darwin taught that because everything evolves biologically, that means everything evolves morally, philosophically. So now all morality evolves, now the Declaration of Independence must evolve. So that whole thing about liberty and pursuit of happiness and liberty of life, that's just some old Caesar gibberish, and we need to evolve from that.
Do you take
and
a
that
stand?
Is what happened.
Do you take a stand on pro-choice or pro-life?
I'm most definitely pro-life.
Okay, that's what I was picking up. So,
yeah,
I'm the same way. I'm pro-life. Well,
okay.
The way you wrote your book, I really like on how you broke out so many different sections on it.
Yeah.
There is one section that you have in here. Well, actually, there's several different sections, but one in particular that comes out is section 2, and for everybody, if you haven't had a chance to read this book yet, it's For God or for Tyranny, and you can pick it up on this website, tedshoebat.com, and several different places. But the book is broken down into many different. Basically, you break down different sections of religion in comparison against Christianity in different parts like that. Correct?
Yes, we break it down into sections, and the chapters are broken down. The sections are broken down into small chapters. And each one is a different subject.
Well,
but go on. Sorry.
The thing with what I was going to say is so for example, for section 1, it's Shinar and the attempts to revive it. Section 2 is Tyrannies of the Psychotic. 3 is the Islamic and leftist comradeship. Then you even compare For God over Paganism, Nazi Christianity, and it keeps going on and on. But I like on how you have for section 2, the Tyrannies are psychotic. And you go into talking about, as you mentioned, the subsections for these. It's really, really sectioned out and broken down really well. But you go in to talk about For God for psychopathic vampires and psychopaths desecrate God's image and things like that.
Right.
And so when I saw that, I kind of got a chuckle out of it because I kind of think you're right. And so when you were talking about earlier your reason for writing the book and wanting to break this down, and that's exactly what you did. Break this down so people can get more depth into it. Then when I started reading it, I was like, he's right about that. So,
yes, go on.
Oh no, go ahead.
Well, I just want to say that the reason why we broke it down into small chapters makes it easier for people to read, and it gives them a better understand. I think it helps people remember things better when you break it down into small parts instead of giving them long, written out sections. Each chapter actually connects perfectly to the other one because I originally wrote them out as one whole subject, but to make it easier, I broke it down into small chapters. But the whole thing about For God or for psychopath, that's one thing that I did a lot of reading up on. And you look at the even the groups here in America, we have the Mexican Mafia, or you have numerous of these Hispanic gangs. Many of them are involved in witchcraft and in the occult. And there's one case in L.A. where they stole a crucifix and they urinated all over it, defecated all over it. And we see what the Muslims do in the Middle East. For example, they took out Joseph's tomb and took out numerous other Jewish holy sites, and they defecated all over them. They urinated on all of them. And the Nazis did the same thing. Then you had Nazis, young men who were devoted to Hitler, run into the churches and defecate, and urinate all over all the holy holy images and all that. And it shows you that the devil's a very disgusting person. Or he's not really a person, it's a spirit. And that those who are for or are against Christianity, when they war against Christianity, they really do act very similar, in that they act like savages. And that's one of the reasons why I just cannot believe that Islam is a conservative religion, because it permits, in the Hadith and also in the Quran, it permits the destruction and the defilement of Christian churches or Jewish synagogues and Christian objects like the Bible or the crucifix or the statues of Mary, and it permits it. So there is no respect for other people's beliefs in Islam. Now, I understand that Americans are it's taboo to talk against other people's religions in America, but, right when you say something is taboo, and, you should respect other people's beliefs because everybody has their belief and that's their own truth. But right when you accept that, then nothing is really real. If nothing is definite, that means nothing has a definition. If in order for something to exist, it has to have a definition.
Well, it's definition within that group's minds, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean just because somebody else doesn't believe it doesn't mean that it's not real.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean? I don't understand.
Oh, so for example, me being Christian, and I believe in Christianity, and studying all different religions and stuff like that, I have a massive belief system. But I wouldn't necessarily go back and for me trying to keep an open mind, I wouldn't necessarily go back and say that like Buddhism or Taoism or something like that isn't real. It's just not in my belief system in terms of I fully support. I can believe that they believe it, but I would never go back.
Well, of course they believe it. Well, of course they believe in it, but the people that I'm referring to are those who tell me, well, you should not criticize other people's beliefs because that is their own truth, and that there is no absolute truth. Well, that's just impossible. There has to be an absolute truth. And the reason why there is an absolute truth is because when we look at nature, when we look at a universe, it's filled with laws, absolute laws that cannot be broken.
Oh yeah.
So if there is this magnificent design which is absolute and is natural law, then it implies a lawmaker. And the question is, who is this lawmaker? Well, this lawmaker obviously is absolute truth. So because we have a God who is the absolute truth, we believe in the God of truth, the God of order, then that means that his laws and his morality is the absolute truth, no matter what anybody can say. You can say you don't believe in it, but that doesn't make you right. Or that does not prohibit one to criticize the beliefs of those who don't believe in God, who don't believe in the absolute God, the God of the Bible, the God of Christianity. And you look at, even if you look at the Buddhist religions, people say, well, Buddhism is a peaceful religion and all that. And the question that I have for those, I'm not saying you personally, but the questions I have for those who believe it's this peaceful religion is who committed Pearl Harbor? They were Buddhists. They were Zen Buddhists. They were the followers of the Mahara school, of Buddhism. One of the oldest, which came from India into Japan. And they believed that life was just, that there was nothing wrong with committing suicide. I mean, there's even one ancient Buddhist saying, which is, better to light yourself on fire than light candles. Better to destroy yourself than commit yourself to rituals. So, for me, criticizing religion is one of the great freedoms of this country. People criticize Christianity all the time, and Christians don't get up and try to kill people. But Muslims who are offended by those who criticize Islam immediately want to kill you, and I know that for a fact because I have relatives who are Muslim, and they wouldn't mind killing me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even whenever we talk about natural laws, me being an engineer and love mathematics and physics and all that other stuff, if I look at the natural laws mathematically, I still believe there's a lot that we don't know yet. There's no possible way we could actually understand everything that's going on in this world or in this universe, and so that's why I like to have a belief system that there is something still out there that even we can't just solidify and say, okay, Newton's law is Newton's law and that's it. It is for what it is now, but once you start getting into people who are studying theories and physicists and stuff like that, it's just so possible. I believe my faith system, but I also wonder what their beliefs are and why they come about those different beliefs. And I guess that's why I get into looking at different religions like that. And you're right, the heart of Muslims and the hearts of and the minds of other people's religion. There are some that, again, I'm an Iraq war veteran, and I know what it's like for people to fight for their religion because they did it wholeheartedly. I mean, it was amazing to see the things that they did under the guise of their beliefs. And so, the same thing, I agree with you also on the Buddhism part that I don't necessarily believe that every religion is always peaceful. There are some forceful laws or things within the religion that actually causes them to be kind of against the religion itself. So even if you look into what we're talking about, just Americanism's ideas of not wanting to disrespect somebody else's religion or say anything against it because of it being taboo. Well, I mean, you look at our amendments. The amendment for free speech.
Right.
So is it a culture or nature or nurture, or is it a culture issue or what? Or is it a religion issue not to talk about stuff like that? I personally like to talk about it. That's why I think you're so fascinating about your book.
No, it's very fascinating. I'm also very interested in why people believe in the things they do, and I'm also very interested in for example, if a society believes in this certain belief and they behave a certain way because of that, well, why? Like, for example, the Mexican, the Aztec, going back to the Aztec religion, or even the Native Indians here, the Native Indians here in the United States, their religion was completely naturistic, or completely astral.
Yeah, we have some very good friends who are Native Americans. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the question is they were. The question is they were. Many of the tribes were very violent, specifically the Apache and the Comanche, and they worshipped Mother Earth. They worshipped the sky, the planets. Well, why does somebody believing in that religion wholeheartedly make them want to kill for it? And even if you look at Islam is also a very naturistic religion, because if you look at its main image, which is Kaaba in Mecca, if you look at originally what that image represents, it represents many things. It represents the vulva of Mother Earth, or what the Arabs call Alat, and she also had different names as well throughout Arabia. And if you look at, it also represents Venus. The ancient Greeks, such as Herodotus and other old writers, such as John of Damascus, talked about what the Arabs worshipped, and even John of Damascus specifically talked about the Kaaba and referred it to as an image of Aphrodite, which is the Greek Venus, or the Arabian Alat, or Aftar, which is another name for it. And it's also a symbol of Saturn, which can be disputed, but I believe it is, because if you look at the Arab word for when referencing to the Kaaba, and I can't really remember it off the top of my head, but it does reference to Saturn. And there's one scholar who speaks about this. His name is George Sale, and I would highly recommend looking at his work. But the Muslims are, they're very violent. They're willing to kill for their religion. They're willing to kill for this image. And the Romans as well were into naturistic religion. And they were also willing to kill for their religion. So I believe that when you look at tyrannical governments, the reason why they are tyrannical is the religion. And think about this: if you worship nature, and this is what I believe, if you worship nature, Mother Earth, Sun, the Moon, it makes it very easy to worship a man, because human beings are part of nature,
right.
And the Romans believed that human beings spread from Mother Earth, the Earth itself, and that because we came from a god or a goddess, that we ourselves are part of this divine image, this divine earth. And that the Caesar himself, because he is so great and powerful, he must be a god. And if you look at even in Imperial Japan, the Shinto religion, or the Zen Buddhist religion, is very much into the naturistic religion as well.
Right.
And they had no problem worshiping their emperor. So that's why I'm very fascinated with things like that. And why do people, why do certain civilizations who espouse this religion, who subscribe to these religions, end up doing very similar things?
Now,
which is the worship of the emperor and such and such.
Yeah, I don't necessarily get into the whole bloodline of why one bloodline person is an emperor or not. Now, what are your thoughts on paganism? Because one of your sections in here is for God or for paganism.
Yes. That's a very good question. I could talk for hours on it. But basically what I've been telling you is my thoughts on paganism, but
that's what I was
expound
thinking.
more on that. What's that?
So that's what I was thinking. That's where I thought you were going with it, or that you were talking about, was this particular section.
Right. But I could expand more on it. My thoughts on paganism is that you read the Bible, it begins with Adam and Eve and all that, and then after the flood, the first thing that Noah does right when he leaves the ark is he makes an altar and he sacrifices to God, and God appreciates the sacrifice. He blesses it. He says that because of this sacrifice, no more will I destroy mankind with flood. Now, when you say that, obviously, as a Christian, this is what I believe. Obviously, human beings first knew the true God. He started out with Noah. He knew who the true God was, and I'm sure his sons also knew who the true God was. And the altars were killing animals. They weren't human sacrifice. And then, according to what I have read, for example, you read the writings of John of Damascus, or you read the writings of Epiphanius, what you find is that the ancient, these are old Christian writers, what we find is that people began to worship nature. And even St. Paul talks about this, is that at one point in time they knew the true God, but they began to worship animals, began to worship fishes and things of nature. And obviously people got into naturistic worship. And what we find, according to some of the old writers that I have read, like Philo, the ancient writer Philo and all that, is that people began to commit human sacrifices. And they begin to commit human sacrifices to the planets. And we find in also in the ancient Egyptian writings, some of the oldest kings of Egypt did horrific human sacrifices to Jupiter, the planet Jupiter. And the Egyptians, I believe around the 5th century, archaeologists have found a lot of evidence that there was immense amounts of human sacrifices to the sun. So my opinion on paganism is that you look at some of the greatest civilizations on earth that had, or the most famous that is, that had paganism, and they were riddled with tyranny. They worshipped the pharaoh. They committed human sacrifices, cannibalism. Even in the Middle East, where the king was believed to have received the power of kingship from the astral bodies or the host of heaven in the sky, the gods in the sky. And he was, because of that power, he was believed to have absolute power and absolute authority. And that's why we find these kings conquering other peoples or tyrannically controlling their subjects to give up their property and also to build immense pyramids and temples to the king. And these pyramids and these temples were made to glorify the king's image. So basically, these kings were believed to have given power by that. And you say, well, why is that? Like, how do you explain these beliefs? Well, it's a very, very good question. The Sumerians, or the Babylonians, even the Akkadians, believed that the cities which were built by kings, were touching the heavens. And by the heaven, I'm not talking about the throne of the Almighty, the sublime, transcending heaven, which nobody can perceive on earth. But I'm talking about the heaven, which is the host of heaven, the moon, the sun, the planets, the stars. And the Sumerians and the Mesopotamian people believed that their cities were touching these astral bodies, were very close to the astral bodies, and they received power from these astral bodies. And they believe that the king...
Even if you go look at the Egyptian hieroglyphics, there's writings and drawings talking about the same stuff.
Oh yes, yes. The Egyptian and the Mesopotamian kingdom both started at the same time.
Right.
And according to the Greek writer Proclus, when the Egyptians were first beginning their civilization, they looked to the Chaldeans actually as an inspiration to build their pyramids, because the Mesopotamian people were building the ziggurat, or the step tower, which was basically what we read in the Bible, the Tower of Babel.
Right. Yeah.
You build these immense towers to reach the heavens. And when the Bible talks about reaching the heavens, it's not really talking about the people weren't really stupid. They didn't really believe that they were going to reach up that high. It was a symbol. It was symbolic of man connecting with the host of heaven, sun, and the stars. And so we see that they believe that the power of these planets, these hosts of heaven, really came and bestowed, and they believed that the gods lived in the planets as well, and that these gods bestowed power to the king, and therefore he had all the power in the world to do whatever he wanted, and that would include using his subjects. And there's actually a very, very fascinating ancient text. I believe it's called the Prism of Gudea, and Gudea was one of the earliest kings in Mesopotamia. I believe he was a king of Erech, one of the first cities of ancient Mesopotamia, and he says that he had a vision from a goddess that instructed him to build a temple dedicated to the planets and the stars. And so what he did is he told his subjects, there was no such thing as a citizen at those times. Everybody was a slave, basically. And he forced the people to build this great temple. And it was really a step tower dedicated to the planets and to the stars. And in the prison, King Gudea himself says, he says, I had my people build this temple, and I had my people worship me as a god. So now the king himself is God. So the power from the planet, the power from these astral deities, not only blessed him with the greatest power, absolute power, but they also blessed him with deity himself. And it was believed by the Sumerians as well, that when the king died, his soul united with the sun. Exact same belief with the Egyptians. So there is a connection, I believe, between paganism and tyranny, simply for the belief that in the belief that they had this idea that the planets and the host of heaven gave them the greatest of absolute power, and it was part of a state religion.
What are some other ways for people to contact you? And do you have any future projects or shows, or what's your next book that's coming out?
Well, the next book I'm working on right now is going to be a little while before it's done, but it's not going to be, I don't know exactly what the title is going to be, but it's going to be literally about the nature of tyranny and the nature of civilization. It's going to be a lot deeper than the first two books, because it's not just going to present the ideology and the products of the ideology, but it's going to show why, when a certain civilization adopts the belief that, depending on that belief, certain things happen. Why is it when civilizations that have the state religion of the pagan ideology, that they become very tyrannical, and they impose the worship of the emperor, and they impose the rituals of human sacrifice, and not just that, but the ideas of taking away private property and all that, and why the pagan religions really encourage that as well. So I think it's a very detailed subject. It's a very sensitive subject, and it takes a lot of research, and that includes reading the ancient books. I think reading the ancient books is one of the greatest things that a researcher can do, because when you read the ancient books, you're literally reading the word of the man who lived at the time.
Right.
Which is why I enjoy reading the ancient Roman writers, Livius, Suetonius, Plutarch, Tacitus, and even reading the writers such as Josephus, Herodotus, Aelian, things like those writers, and also as well as the old Christian writers, Eusebius, Tertullian, Lactantius, John Damascus. I think because they lived near that era, that it was first-hand experience. So you're literally getting first-hand sources, and it's very, very, you're holding truth, really. And it's a very beautiful feeling, I think. It's better than reading modern books, in my opinion, because a modern writer tends to input his opinion, whereas the ancient writers were simply putting what they saw. So I think it's much more effective.
Nice. So, TedShoebat.com, you got Shoebat.com. Is there any other ways that people can contact you? Facebook or any other places? Because you have a lot of video media also on YouTube. You've got a lot of really, really good stuff.
Right. I did numerous debates, and I do have a website, TedShoebat.com, and there's also a Facebook, TedShoebat. But the website I think is pretty good. I got articles that I've written. I have articles that I write. And I write these articles. Maybe I write a new article maybe once every 2 weeks, I would say. So it's always some good information. And usually when I do a debate, I will find the debate archive, and I will have it put on the website. So there's all kinds of things: interviews, debates, videos, articles. And so it's not just a website where you can where you can purchase things, but it's also a website where you can receive information as well.
Right, because you have a blog, I think it's called the Tedland Daily.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, and you do a lot of speaking out for America, and I think that's pretty good as well. So. Thank
you. So yeah, I do numerous amounts of speaking engagements as well. Churches, mostly, in fact, all churches, which is fine. I think that the church, in my opinion, is as Christians, we need to always try to protect, because the devil already has the Muslims, the mosques, and the other temples of the pagan religions, the false religions. But the church is what the devil really wants. I think the church is the most vital thing to protect, because if you destroy the church, then what else do you have? And the church is really, in my opinion, what brought civilization to this country.
Nice.
And what brought civilization to many different parts of the world.
Well, I was just about to ask if you had any final thoughts you would like to share for everyone, but I think that was pretty powerful for what you just said. It's protecting the churches. But is there anything else that you would like to mention?
Well, I believe that the absolute truth is what we always should look out for, and the idea that truth is changing is an oxymoron. Truth will always be truth, no matter what. And I think that's the most important belief that we can have, because as soon as we believe that truth is evolving, and that our rights to liberty, to the pursuit of happiness, and to life evolve, then that is when life becomes meaningless and life becomes useless. And it becomes justified to subject life or terminate the lives of others. And that is really when tyranny begins. So that is my final thought.
Nice. Well, I do like to thank you wholeheartedly for being on the show. Your book is amazing. The work that you do, the stuff, I'm just sitting here, in all listening to all the stuff that you talk about. You're definitely well educated in your material, and I respect that highly for you as an author and you as a researcher, because I agree with you. In order to go back and really understand some of these things, you have to read some of the old work, and you've clearly done that. And so everybody go check out his book, For God or for Tyranny. Check out his websites. Have him come talk to some of your churches if you want. You're an amazing person, and it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you tonight.
Well, you're a good man yourself. I appreciate you having me on the show and giving me the time to talk to your audience.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Dad. You have a great night.
All right, sir. You too.
Here's our musical guest of JMR Productions with the Maynard Triplets, singing the song from the same titled CD, His Name Was Freedom.
At an outdoor cafe, sitting down to drink my coffee, something made me look away. When I turned my head, I saw him. He was staggering around, looking lost, or maybe he was found. So I offered him some water, and he quickly drank it down. He said he'd been in battle in that beautiful new town, and he showed me what he held on to. It was red, white, and blue, and I knew he was fighting for me and you. His name was freedom, in America freedom. He was hurt, but he couldn't be broken. Sand, and I thought he looked familiar, like a long-lost high school friend, and I knew he'd be with us to defend. Then he told me of his story, couldn't believe what he had seen, from the best of human kindness to the worst of human beings. But he felt his life transforming his courage. He said we'd had it deep inside. Through my tears, my heart was filled with endless pride. His name was freedom, in America freedom, and he'll live on and on. His name was freedom, in America freedom. We'll always sing this freedom song.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
At Taylor Gifts, we do customized monogramming and embroidery. We can monogram anything from a simple one name on a bib for a baby to a customized logo on a company shirt. We can make gifts for your wedding entourage and gifts for your friends. Label your children's items for school and put names on jerseys for sports. If you have items of your own you want them monogrammed and embroidered, we can do that. Tailor Gifts are sewn with high-quality thread on a professional embroidery machine. So go to the website www.tailorgifts.net, call 251-391-4354, email sales@tailorgifts.net, visit us at ETSY, and Facebook us. We are ready for your orders.
Welcome to WROM, Realms of Music Radio and Social Network. We support independent artists and talk shows, hosting a large discussion forum and an artist gallery. We also have a large social network combining the best of Facebook and MySpace into one. So make sure you submit your music to us and create a profile to promote yourself today. That's realmsofmusic.com, the best of music radio.
The Ghost Tales Television Network, GTN. GTN is designed to give the paranormal TV and filmmaking community the opportunity to showcase their talents and creations. If you believe you have what it takes to create your very own TV show and or short film and you would like the opportunity to showcase your creations, you may contact us at ghosttalestv@gmail.com or call 901-377-7166 for more details. Make sure you visit ghosttalestv.com. GTN, America's Paranormal Superstation.
Thank you for listening to the show. I am your host, Bryan Lee Whatley. I hope you have an amazing weekend. I look forward to seeing you next time when another story begins. Until then, love and light.